Hello and welcome back again. After dedicating the past 3 weeks in a deep research to prepare a series of presentation on ESG largely confined to India. So let us start with the introduction of this series. Looking at the vibrant economy of India, environmental, social and governance criteria have gained increasing relevance in India during the past decade, driven by the rising sustainability challenge, regulatory policy, investor demand and global influence. However, the pace of ESG in India is still developing as it is largely practiced among 100 listed companies only, while the remaining largely grapple in the boardroom amount confusion over the implementation part. This happens due to advent of many international players adopting their framework and reporting system to be the best in the market. Globally, the commitment to the Paris Agreement, UN SDGs and net zero emission have pushed export-driven Indian companies to embedded ESG policy. This forced the Government of India to initiate ESG in India from profit to responsible business, accounting more towards socially responsible behavior. Spirited race against time, India has boldly positioned itself at the forefront of the global ESG movement, transcending the traditional focus on profit to embrace a more holistic approach towards environment, stewardship, social responsibility, and exemplify corporate governance. The journey has been marked by significant milestones, starting with the launch of National Voluntary Guidelines by Ministry of Corporate Affairs in 2009, the embedded of corporate social responsibility with a legal fabric under Clause 135 of the Companies Act of 2013, the alignment of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in 2016, the introduction of National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct in 2009, the integration of GRI standards with SEBI Business Responsibility Reporting Framework by BSE in 2022, and the pioneering of the Balanced Framework for ESG Disclosure Rating and Investing in 2023. This evolution reflects India's unwavering commitment to setting a new benchmark in sustainable and responsible practice. Despite these, wrong myths and confusion still prevails among the industries and ESG professionals regarding the elements to be included in these 3 pillars of ESG. What should be measurable yardstick when industry operations are concerned beyond profit margin, and how they are more responsible could be projected at the stock exchange with the rating agency that has a feeble knowledge regarding the existing law of our country, which are somehow directly or indirectly associated with the ESG operation. Besides, varying methodology for their data collection makes it tedious as well as irrational to check the true performance of ESG in the commercial entity. Though India is lagging when compared globally in the matters of ESG implementation, the market intelligence reveals that definite pathway India is paved with the opportunity to create a corporate ecosystem that not only prosper economically but also contributes to a healthier planet and towards a more equitable society. Thus, taking the lead from this, a series of videos episode is planned to deliver right information as per the existing law and educate the concerned professionals and business entity operating from India. So stay tuned every week at 9 p.m. on Thursday with a new episode on ESG for India, which will be screened on this channel. An appeal is made for all upcoming professionals and interested business entities. Request to subscribe my channel. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I will introduce you to one of the most demanding topics related to the rise of ESG in India and an overview. It's noteworthy that this concept made its way to India about a decade after its introduction in 1998 by John L. Kington, co-founder of the business consultant Sustainability. In this presentation, I will discuss how the ESG concept has evolved within the Indian trade and commerce sector since 2009 onward. There is still a lot of confusion surrounding ESG implementation in India since its inception here in 2011. Uncertainty remains regarding the key players driving ESG adoption and how to operationalize it locally. While international ESG framework and rating agency are marketing their Western-centric system here, my focus will be on promoting ESG specifically within the Indian industrial context. My goal is to refer ESG competency domestically across the Confederation of Indian Industry members and relevant government ministry to compete globally. Over this series, I will explore ESG component in Indian context under existing rules and regulation. This incorporates current environmental and social protection with corporate governance ethics for mandatory ESG disclosure. I believe it's important to share my observation and experience in implementing the ESG scheme in India. The intent is to bring clarity to the understanding of ESG in the Indian context. Subsequently, presentation will cover various aspects including the ESG framework, hierarchical setup, functional values, establishment of protocols, challenges of implementations and the integrations of institutions along with the option for certifying professionals and institutions. So stay tuned for an in-depth exploration of ESG and its relevance in Indian landscapes. Based on my experience, I find there has been substantial progress in integrating ESG principle into business operation, as provided from 2011 onwards. Thus, several challenges and problems need to be addressed for the effective implementation of ESG in India. Firstly, there is a substantial lack of awareness and education regarding ESG among business, investors, and the general public. Many companies remain unaware of the potential advantage of ESG integration and struggle to incorporate these principles into their strategies. Secondly, India's regulatory framework for ESG is still evolving. While efforts have been made to establish guidelines for ESG reporting and disclosure, the absence of comprehensive and standardized reporting framework leads to inconsistency and confusion for businesses. Thirdly, the quality of standardization of ESG data in India are often subpar, making it challenging for investors to accurately assess a company's sustainability efforts and make informed investment decisions. Fourthly, the prevalence of short-termism in Indian business driven by pressure to deliver immediate financial results often clash with the long-term perspective required for successful ESG investment. The relentless focus on quarterly earning can hinder the adoption of the sustainable practices. Fifthly, effective stakeholder engagement remains a significant hurdle. Companies struggle to engage transparently and meaningfully with a diversified range of stakeholders, including employees, local communities, and environmental groups. Resource constraints also impeded ESG efforts, especially among the small and medium-sized enterprises that lacks the resource and expertise to implement comprehensive ESG initiative. Gender diversity is a persistent concern with the Indian companies struggling to achieve gender parity at the leadership level, which is a critical aspect of the social in ESG. Lastly, the managing supply chain risk related to ESG is another daunting challenge, particularly for companies with complex supply chain. Ensuring responsible sourcing and ethical supply chain practice required substantial efforts. And the last is enforcement and accountability mechanism related to ESG in India are often weak, leading to limited consequences for non-compliance or unethical practice. Next is addressing economic inequality and poverty. Fundamental aspect of social in ESG proves challenging due to India's significant economic disparity. Another is additionally, while ESG investment products are gaining popularity, some financial institutions in India have yet to fully integrate ESG criteria into their investment decision, restricting capital flow to ESG-friendly companies. India's culture and regional diversity necessitate tailoring the ESG consideration to specific contexts and challenges in different regions. Next is related to the policy inconsistency and changes in the government regulation create uncertainty of business with ESG initiative, highlighting the need for consistency long-term policy. Next is India also grapple with the environmental challenges such as air and water pollution, deforestation and resource depletion, complicating efforts to meet the environmental ESG standard. The looming threat of the climatic change further exacerbates the situation, making it difficult for companies, especially those in high carbon emission sector, to align their practice with the climate-related ESG goals. Another is access to green and sustainable financial options remain limited for many Indian business, hindering their ability to invest in ESG projects and initiatives. Lastly, greenwashing, a practice where companies make false or exaggerated claims about their environmental and social efforts, misleads investors and consumers, eroding the credibility of genuine ESG initiatives. Overall, one can say that India's journey towards the effective ESG integration faces multifaceted challenges that requires concrete efforts from various stakeholders to promote sustainable and responsible business practice in the country. Today's presentation primary objective includes addressing the local industry needs through information, education and communication. Unlock insights that tailor to Indian business on ESG, addressing local challenges and opportunities, demystify ESG complexity, identify key components. The series of forthcoming presentation on ESG also aims to identify and define ESG element and develop an operational plan integrating certified professionals and relevant bodies, empowering program managers and policymakers to drive country-specific ESG investment. The overarching goal is to maintain a balance between the nature, human activities, that is social equality, and business equity, that is governance, ensuring with the holistic approach. One can conclude that the series of presentation will strive for balance in our planet, people and prosperity through nature, social equity and good governance practice in India. Here the set objectives are narrated broadly in the coming series of presentation related to the issue of ESG in India. So please be patient and listen to the series of ESG presentation which will cover various type of topics related to ESG in India. One of the key issue is related to the giving meaningful meaning for environmental, social governance, that is ESG, to be defined for India. Let us take in 1998, John Elkington identified a novel cluster of non-financial consideration that should factor into a company's equity value, encompassing non-commercial aspect related to the environmental, social governance in the commercial entity. Subsequently, in 2006, ESG issues were officially introduced in United Nations Principle for Responsible Investment report, which include the Fresh Field reports and Who Cares Win. This represented a pivotal momentum as it marked the first instance where ESG criteria was integrated into the financial assessment of companies. ESG comprises a comprehensive set of standards utilized by the socially conscious investor. It entails evaluating a company's performance in environmental stewardship, scrutinizing social interaction with the stakeholders, and assessing the effectiveness of governance structure, including the leadership, executive compensation, audit practice, internal control, and the shareholder rights. The factors influencing environmental, social, and governance in India are multifaceted and can be broadly classified into four categories as external factors, internal factors, corporate governance practice, and government initiative. External factors globe events such as environmental disaster and social issues have underscored the impact of business activities on the planet and society, leading to recognition of the significance of ESG factors since the late 20th century. Trade agreement countries like EU often includes environmental and labor standard provision, encouraging Indian companies to adopt ESG practice. The availability of ESG rating agency in India and the pivotal role of industrial bodies like CII in actively promoting the ESG principle and guiding companies in implementing ESG practice cannot be overstated. Furthermore, India's participation in the global trade and investment means that international ESG standard and initiatives such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Reporting Framework have significant influence on the Indian business and investing. Another is related to internal factors. Growing environmental awareness about the climate change is increasingly recognized as a major threat in India. Climate risks such as air, water, noise pollution, and social concerns like poverty, inequality, and human rights issues are pressing challenges in India. Consumers and investors are becoming more sensitive to these issues and are seeking companies that contribute positively to society. These challenges are pushing companies to adopt environmentally sustainable practice to mitigate risk and comply with the regulation, leading to public demand for companies to operate sustainable and address environmental issues. Another is related to commercial, that is the corporate governance practice. Change in the board composition, audit process and executive compensation have encouraged companies to enhance their governance standard to align with the ESG principle. The growing interest of domestic and international investors in ESG compliance company has pushed Indian business to prioritize ESG factor for sustainable and social responsible investment, driving companies to improve their ESG performance. Investors, both domestic and international, have shown a growing interest in ESG factor when making investment decisions. This demand has driven companies to improve their ESG practice to attract investment. The upcoming ESG reporting strategy under the stakeholder capitalism approach have created value creation for business using the ESG framework. Overall, unconventional threats from climatic change, environmental challenges, and social awareness together have created the demand of integration of ESG factors into provocative business strategy. Last but not the least is related to the government initiatives. The government has launched several initiatives to promote ESG such as National Action Plan on Climate Change and the Green Energy Mission. Regulators like SEBI have introduced various guidelines and mandates around business responsibility reporting, ESG disclosure and sustainable reporting for the companies. Government policies and regulation play a significant role in shaping ESG practice. India has introduced various policies and regulations related to environmental protection, labor law standard, corporate governance, and sustainable development. These regulations encourages companies to adopt ESG practice and disclose relevant information, thereby boosting ESG adoption. Increasing media coverage of environmental and social issues keep ESG principle in the public eye. These factors together have created a strong momentum of ESG in India, which is still evolving but holds significant potential for shaping a more sustainable and responsible business landscape. To grasp the concept of sustainability, it's essential to understand why it is so crucial. There are three key drivers underscore significance. Firstly, the world's population is growing exponentially. Secondly, there is a finite supply of non-renewable natural resources. Lastly, there is mounting pricing pressure on these non-renewable resources, which will significantly impact sustainable business practice. In simple terms, sustainability means thriving and evolving without depleting the natural resources needed for the future. Different entities define sustainability as per their specific need. The United Nations earlier definition in 1987 emphasized meeting current needs without jeopardizing future generation ability to meet their own. The three-pillar sustainability model comprises environmental sustainability, which underscores the importance of natural resources and biodiversity. Social sustainability focuses on social structure, well-being and harmony, vital aspects affected by poverty, wars and injustice. Economic sustainability highlights the capacity of economic to grow, especially crucial for the finance many sustainable initiatives. These are a set of standards for companies' operations that socially conscious investors use to screen potential investment or what equities or bonds are to be purchased from the company. As per national guidelines on economic and social environmental responsibility of business, sustainability has three main pillars: economic, environmental and social. These three pillars are informally referred to as people, planets and profit. These three principles are interconnected, driven by their core principles, and are increasingly practiced in India. Organizations that embrace all three principles simultaneously contribute to creating a sustainable future with responsibility. Overall, in the broadest sense, sustainability refers to the ability to maintain or support a process continuously over time. In business and policy context, sustainability seeks to prevent the depletion of natural or physical resources so that they will remain available for long term. The outcome is achieved by balancing the social, environmental, and economic impacts of business. It is the process that ensures that business goals are pursued without compromising any of the three elements. Owing to my previous explanation, let us do a comparative analysis of ESG versus SDG versus CSR. The Republic of India, since its independence, had a revolutionary history of industrial development till date. Though it is justifiable with all parameters, remarkable interdependence is found in the approaches associated with ESG, SDG, and CSR. The early movement was on the right-based approach that largely focused on the relation to human rights into consideration and implementation of the development of the industrial growth. A right-based approach develops the capacity of duty bearers to meet their obligations and encourages rights holders to claim their rights. Government have three levels of obligation. First, to respect, protect, and fulfill every right. To respect the right meaning refraining from interfering with the enjoyment of the right. Human rights is a common parameter of both social and welfare approach and largely revolves around the participation, accountability, non-discrimination, and equality, empowerment, and legality. Looking at the growth in business profit margin, the trigger of welfare-based approach for a workforce engaged in the development of entity demand for a better living condition. The welfare approach deals with the issue related to inequality, injustice. The approach grew up as a reaction to the quantitative and model building traditions of 1960. This approach looks at the human being as beneficiary or target of all development activities. The approach argues for higher government expenditure on health, education, social secondary, and amenities. People are not participants in the development but also a passive recipient. However, modern welfare approach is based on the principles of equality of opportunity, equitable distribution of wealth, and public responsibility for those unable to avail themselves of the minimal provision of a good life. Sustainability is a holistic approach that considers ecological, social, and economic dimension, recognizing that all must be considered together to find the lasting prosperity, while the egalitarian belief in or is based on the principle that our people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities, or a person who advocate or support the principles of equality for people. Thus, the concept of business with the responsibility emerges with the total commitment of corporate sector. When these approaches materialize, demands for the people, profit, and the planet become the utmost necessary to evaluate through metrics using 17 sustainable goals with 169 targets and 306 national indicators to be monitored for our country's performance towards the environmental, social, with the governance pattern observed in all commercial entity. Based on my previous discussion, let us explore more about the triangular integration model. The triangular interlinked approach of sustainability play a crucial role for Republic of India, where CSR, SDGs, and ESG parameters have meaningful relation with each other. Based on my over 2-decade experience of working with the environment and social sector, I believe that likewise CSR has evolved into ESG, that is, CSR aims to make a business accountable, ESG criteria make its efforts measurable. ESG provides a data that can be analyzed, showing the true picture of the company's sustainability and then act upon. Further, the management of ESG issue has moved from a niche area that sat in the compliance of CSR department of companies to a core strategic priority embedded throughout the organization. Companies are not only focusing on the sustainability of their ESG and operational process and policy, but are increasingly exploring the positive impact of their product on society and the degree to which these products are directly helping achieve societal objective. While CSR is generally understood as being the way through which a company achieves a balance of economic, environmental, and social imperatives, while at the same time addressing the expectations of the shareholders and stakeholders. These align with the SDGs, which are a collection of 17 interlinked objectives designed to serve as shared blueprint of peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. Now let us look example of CSR activities with SDG under ESG as a triangular interlinked activities of sustainability. For companies with a strong CSR ethos, there seems to be a direct line between all three of these aspects of sustainability. The story you create through CSR is quantified by ESG, where you learn how you can make a real impact on your level of social responsibility and uncover the benchmark from which your strategies to improve. By aligning ESG with the areas highlighted by the UN, you also help your business make its contribution to the SDGs. These are few examples that I encountered during the evaluation of CSR activities for nearly 50 big and small entities that have been evaluated under the classification of 17 Sustainable Development Goals both in urban and rural area, and are further divided owing to the ESG criteria that makes its efforts measurable. Well, such combination helps show the true picture of the company's sustainability and then act upon it. This is a true well-tested example of interlinkage of CSR activities arbitrarily linked with the 17 SDG matrices for doing the impact assessment and later classified under ESG nomenclature. Despite of these shortcomings of ESG in India, let us see how ESG is maturing in India. ESG adoption in India is gaining momentum with the growing regulatory action, disclosure requirement, investor activism, and shifting corporate attitudes. However, ESG integration remains at an evolutionary stage. Regulatory mandate by SEBI are strengthening ESG foundation. The top 1,000 listed entities must file business responsibility and sustainability report based on the ESG parameters like emission, water use, gender policy, and board independence. Climate-related financial disclosure are also being rolled out. Mainstream institutional investors are ramping up engagement through ESG. Assets remain under 5% of total asset under management versus over 30% globally. Active investor advocacy through principles like PRI means principles of responsible investment, knowledge sharing via the Sustainable Stock Exchange platform, and pushes for greater transparency are promising shift. Over 90% of S&P BSE 100 companies now publish sustainability reports, mostly adhering to GRI guidelines. However, standardized non-financial disclosure are yet to become mandatory. Assurance from sustainability data also remain voluntary, unlike financial statements. While larger companies have dedicated ESG teams and projects, smaller firms lag due to limitation of ESG awareness, bandwidth, and financing access. Extensive hand-holding of MSMEs will be crucial for creating an encompassing ESG ecosystem, but even today, ESG is a positive driver for future business in India. Integrated reporting combining financial and ESG parameters is gaining acceptance, led by first movers like Wipro, Hindustan Zinc, and Mahindra Finance. Adoption of global framework indicates maturing outlooks. Innovative instruments like sustainability linked loans, green bond, and ESG focused mutual fund are emerging to channel finance towards green sector. Technology is accelerating ESG propagation through digital tracking tools, big data, artificial intelligence, blockchain-based monitoring, and leveraging social network. In conclusion, India ESG environment is steadily evolving through policy mandates, reporting structures, investor activism, and changing corporate attitude. While limitation persists, positive development on multiple fronts suggest a maturing Indian ESG ecosystem. Lastly, I appeal the viewers to bear with me for continuing my presentation under ESG evaluation from concept to practice. So stay tuned next week on Thursday 9 p.m. and don't forget to subscribe my channel. Till then, bye-bye. Hello and welcome back to another interesting continuing topic on India's ESG evaluation from concept to practice. Today, India encounters challenges in ESG integration. There are substantial opportunities to address these issues and promote sustainable and responsible business practice. As global ESG awareness continues to rise, India can leverage ESG principles to stimulate economic growth, enhance social well-being, and bolster the environmental sustainability. Achieving these requires a collaborative efforts from business, investors, policymakers, and civil society. In this presentation, I will discuss environmental efforts within the ESG framework that are increasingly visible, with India making headway in renewable energy adoption, enhanced waste management, and water conservation practice. Corporates are actively reducing their carbon footprint, aligning with the environmental expectations of global investors. Social actions are equally robust, reflecting a commitment to not just a profit but people. Initiative encompassing improved labor standards, community engagement, and enhanced are taking center stage. The social facet of ESG in India is becoming increasingly sophisticated, with the business investment in the upliftment and well-being of their employees and to the communities outside the business entity. On the governance front, the focus is on the fortifying framework that emphasizes accountability and transparency. India corporates are aligning with the global best practices, instituting robust governance mechanisms that appeal to conscientious investors. Milestones such as the mandatory CSR spending directive and the SEBI's business responsibility and sustainability reports mandate for top listed entities signals India's firm commitment to ESG principles. These regulatory frameworks have provided much needed clarity and direction for ESG reporting. The National Voluntary Guidelines for Business Responsibility criteria play a vital role in assessing companies' future financial performance, considering aspects like return and risk. These guidelines introduce environmental and social protection legislation alongside ethical corporate governance. They also mandate corporate disclosure of environmental, social, and governance information utilizing three distinct approaches: the welfare approach, the right-based approach, and the sustainability approach. Now I will narrate on each issue of ESG in detail. Now first I shall discuss status of ESG investment in India. Environmental, social, and governance criteria have become increasingly important in the corporate world, reflecting a growing awareness of sustainability and ESG investment and business practice have gained significant momentum in India over the last decade, driven by the regulatory policy, investors, and global influence and rising sustainability challenge. However, ESG integration remains a long-term journey for Indian market. On the regulatory front, guidelines by SEBI, business responsibility reporting mandates, sustainability disclosure norms have expanded ESG awareness and disclosure by companies. The top 1,000 listed companies now submit business responsibility and sustainability reports. However, compliance levels vary across small and big firms. Enforcement of standards need further strength. Investor demand for sustainable investment has catalyzed the ESG movement. Assets under management of ESG mutual fund have grown from just 2 in 2014 to over 30, totaling $5 billion in 2021. Leading institutions like LIC, SBI and HDFC have incorporated ESG metrics in their investment framework. However, retail investors and smaller firms lag in ESG adoption. Globally, commitments to the Paris Agreement, UN SDGs and net zero emission have influenced top Indian companies operating in export-driven sectors to embedded ESG policy. However, smaller business oriented towards domestic market remains less proactive. On the environment, the major ESG risk for India includes water stress, air pollution, waste management and over-exploitation of natural resources. Companies are slowly responding through clean energy, recycled materials. On the environment, the major ESG risk for India includes water stress, air pollution, waste management, and over-exploitation of natural resources. Companies are slowly responding through clean energy, recycled materials, water conservation, and greener supply chain. But broader commitment are needed to move the needle. Key social risks like poverty, healthcare access, income inequality, and unemployment requires dedicated corporate action on targets like skill development, fair wages, and diversity. More transparent HR policy, better safety guidelines, and community engagement are gradually expanding. Governance changes also underway through independent boards, improved risk management, and higher transparency. However, issues around the corruption, unethical practice, and lack of accountability persist across various sectors and size of business. Overall, while India has made a considerable progress on ESG, the adoption remains nascent and fragmented. Greater regulatory enforcement, investors' advocacy, proactive leadership by industry's champions, partnership, and capacity building can embed sustainability principles deeply across India and power the country transition towards a just, inclusive, and greener economic trajectory. ESG factors are becoming more important to institutional investors around the world when making investment decisions. Let us see individual efforts being made for each letter of ESG. Thus, today one can summarize ESG investing as a need for the global money that have evolved into a driving force. Indian companies seek foreign investments and access to international capital market are aware of the importance of proving outstanding ESG performance. In this slide, I am just summarizing the tips of iceberg related to environmental efforts of ESG in India. Indian companies have been taking a range of initiatives to address critical sustainability issues, including carbon emission reduction, renewable energy adoption, waste management, and resource conservation. Several Indian companies are transitioning from traditional fossil fuel to cleaner and more sustainable energy source. The example mentioned in the slide, proactive sustainability measures carried out by the Indian business demonstrate a thorough dedication to ecological friendly practice encompassing a wide spectrum of green behavior. To lessen their impact on the environment, they are adopting renewable energy options like solar panel and taking part in carbon offsetting activities like planting trees. Additionally, on the agenda are waste reduction techniques and a focus on resource efficiency, with the business implementing cutting-edge technology to reduce waste production and maximize resource utilization. In India, where business are not only prospering economically but also promoting a greener, healthier world for future generations. These coordinate efforts demonstrate a growing commitment to environmental responsibility and is helping shape a more sustainable corporate landscape. In this slide, I am just taking a few examples of social action under the ESG in India. I am summarizing the efforts made by the Indian companies in the social action for ESG. A company's commitment to moral and sustainable business practices includes initiatives related to corporate social responsibility, community involvement, and labor practice. The highlighted example in the slide from these corporate entities demonstrate a diversified range of corporate social responsibility initiatives, signifies the persistent commitment of the prominent companies in India to tackling crucial social challenges. These companies are not only profit-seeking entities but also active promoters of social improvement, focusing on initiatives that promote positive changes through subsidies program, affordable healthcare, sanitation, hygiene campaigning, sustainable procurement practice, and supporting girls' education. They exhibit a holistic approach to corporate social responsibility that transcends commercial interest and ultimately foster a more equitable and prosperous society. A major social impact could be judged from the top 1,000 listed companies, referring the non-financial performance for judging or linking the ESG score by rating agency. In this slide, I am going to discuss few examples related to governance strategies of ESG in India. Corporate governance in India has undergone significant reforms in recent years. The Company Act 2013 represents a landmark legislative overhaul introducing crucial provisions aimed at enhancing transparency and accountability. Enhancing transparency is a fundamental pillar of corporate governance in India. Regulatory authorities, market force, and investor expectation have driven efforts to improve disclosure and transparency. SEBI listing regulation, for instance, impose stringent disclosure norms on listed companies. Moreover, institutional investors and proxy advisor firms have taken on more active role in engaging with the companies on environmental, social, and governance matters and voting on resolution, thereby advocating for a greater transparency and accountability. The establishment of the National Financial Reporting Authority has bolstered efforts to ensure the quality of financial reporting and auditor independence. Further, the reinforcement transparency in corporate operation. The example narrated in the slide deserves a rising appreciation for the values of varied viewpoint and background in the top leadership in India, which reflects a wider movement towards diversity in India's corporate landscape. Though I had summarized ESG investment, environmental, social, and governance in the actual picture, still there is a mammoth task to explore issues under ESG for these variables and very challenging for India. Owing to research experience, I will be taking each topic separately in my forthcoming series of presentation on ESG. Here I am going to discuss the milestones of ESG in India. It is very difficult to benchmark the origin of ESG in India, but it is believed that socially responsible investing has been over 2 decades. The origin of the term ESG can be traced back to the early 2000s when the investment manager and other stakeholders began to recognize the importance of considering non-financial factors in their decision-making process, tending more towards holistic approach that emphasize the importance of considering a range of environmental, social, and governance factors in investment decision rather than just focusing on a few specific issues. The early seed of ESG refers way back to an array from 2009 to 2012, where in 2008, the India First Sustainability Index, the SP and ESG India Index, was launched to track ESG performance of the top 50 companies, which later in 2009 expanded to 500 companies. In the same year, 2009, in India, voluntary guidelines on corporate social responsibility by Ministry of Corporate Affairs marked the initial push towards the sustainable practice. Later in 2011, the National Voluntary Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs further strengthened the focus on the environmental and the social responsibility. This follows the Security and Exchange Board of India in 2012 made mandate business responsibility reporting for the top 100 listed companies by market capitalism, introducing ESG consideration into financial reporting. India marked the gradual growth of ESG from 2013 when the Companies Act of 2013 mandate the disclosure of energy conservation efforts in annual reports, further integrating environmental aspect into corporate governance. Well, in 2015, BRSR requirement extended to the top 500 listed companies, expanding the scope of ESG reporting. Later in 2017, SEBI issued a guideline for institutions of listing of green debt securities facilitating investment and environmentally responsible projects. One should also note that simultaneously there is a progress of ESG reporting framework in India. The mandatory formalization and real acceleration were marked after 2018 when SEBI constituted a committee on ESG disclosure to recommend a comprehensive framework. A breakthrough came in 2021 the introduction of Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report framework by SEBI, mandating detailed ESG disclosure for the top 1,000 listed companies. This framework aims to promote responsible business practice, encouraging listed companies to integrate sustainability consideration into their strategies and operations, thereby fostering long-term value creation for stakeholders and the broader society. Further, in 2023, strengthening of ESG regulation and framework by SEBI and other government agencies. The GRI standards are globally recognized guidelines for the sustainability reporting introduced in India in 2017 and fully operationalized in 2021 onward. They provided a structured framework for organizations to report on their economic, environmental, and social performance. These standards help companies in India align their reporting with international best practices, enhancing transparency and accountability in areas such as environmental impact, human rights, and corporate governance. These are 8 documents that enhance the ESG activities in India. We will take each document in description in the forthcoming topic under the ESG series of presentation, but will take one of the most important document on the National Voluntary Guidelines on Social, Environmental, and Economic Responsibility of Business. The National Voluntary Guideline on Social, Environmental, and Economic Responsibility of Business were released by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in India in July 2011. The guidelines are a significant step towards the inclusive development, aiming to develop the corporate sector in their efforts. They were updated in 2015 to capture the key national international development in the development agenda and business responsibility field. The guidelines provided a framework for business to operate responsible, considering economic, social, and environmental aspects. They include principles and core elements guiding on implementation, application of micro, small, and medium enterprises, and a business responsibility reporting framework. The guidelines also provide resource and explanation of terms to aid business in their implementation. The NVG represents a shift from individual charity or philanthropy to corporate social responsibility, corporate citizenship, and responsible business behavior of the commercial entity. In this slide, the National Voluntary Guidelines on Social, Environmental, and Economic Responsibility of Business released by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs in July 2011 is essentially a set of 9 principles that offers Indian business an understanding and approaches inculcate responsible business conduct. However, taking into account the national and international development in the arena of sustainable business since 2011, the NVG have been updated and released as a national guideline on responsible business conduct in March 2019 to reveal alignment of United Nations Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights, UN Sustainable Development Goals, Paris Agreement on Climatic Change, etc. The NGB, the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct, provides a framework for companies to grow inclusively and sustainable while addressing the concern of stakeholders. Overall, the guidelines provide a comprehensive framework for responsible business conduct that balances profitable with the ethical value, social development, and environmental stewardship. We will give a brief each principle one by one. Principle 1 largely focuses on the ethical conduct at all levels by developing proper governance structure, practice, procedure with transparent communication. It also a truthful discharging of the responsibility of financial and other mandatory disclosure. This principle cautions not to engage in practices that are abusive, corrupt, and anti-competition, and avoid complicity with the action of any third party that violates any of the principles. Principle 2 assures safety and optimal resource use over the life cycle of the product. It recognizes the right of its consumer through education, product labeling, appropriate and helpful communication, full details of the content, and safe usage of by promoting sustainable consumption. Further, it also ensured that the manufacturing process and technologies are resource efficient and sustainable and recognize and respect intellectual property rights. Besides, it gives much importance to regular review and improve upon the process of new technology development, deployment, and commercialization, incorporating social, ethical, environmental consideration. Further, Principle 3 gives much impetus to respect the right of freedom of the association, participation, collectively bargaining, and accept the proper grievance redressal mechanism, and provides equal opportunity to all caste, creed, gender, religion, race, disability, or it ensures that no child labor, forced labor, or any form of involuntary labor, paid or unpaid, and provides a cognitive of the life balance of employees, especially women, having facilities of their well-being with harassment-free workplace. Besides, it gives importance to safe, hygienic, and human workplace environmental and ensure continuous skill and competence upgradation of all employees. Principle 4 systematically identify their stakeholders, understands their concern, defines the purpose and scope of engagement, and commit to engaging with them. It also acknowledges assumed responsibility and is transparent about the impact of its policy, decision, product and services, and associated operation on the stakeholders. Further, it gives special attention to stakeholders in underdeveloped areas and resolve differences with stakeholders in just, fair, and equitable manner. Principle 5 helps to understand the human right content of the Constitution of India, national law and policies, and the content of the International Bill of Human Rights. It emphasizes integrating respect for human rights in management system through assessing and managing human rights impact of the business operation and not being complicit with the human rights abuse by the third parties. Further, it recognizes and respects all human rights of relevant stakeholders and groups within and beyond the workplace. This principle promotes the awareness and realization of the right across its value chain. While Principle 6 emphasizes utilizing natural and man-made resources optimally and reasonably, taking measures to check and prevent pollution and ensuring that benefits are shared equitably. It gives much importance to the environment by developing an environment management system and contingency plan for continuous improvement of environmental performance and its reporting. Above all, this principle proactively persuaded and supports its value chain for the adoption. Principle 7 emphasizes business conduct while pursuing the policy advocacy and must ensure that their advocacy positions are consistent with the principle and core element contained in these guidelines. It further directs that business should utilize the trade and industry chambers and association and other such collective platform to undertake such policy advocacy. The principle 8 helps to understand their impact on the social and economic development. It innovates and invests in product technology and process that promote the well-being of society and mitigates any negative impact. It also emphasizes making efforts to complement and support the development priorities at local and national level. Further, the principle cautioned that the business operating in underdeveloped regions should be especially sensitive to the local concern. While last is the Principle 9 considered the overall well-being of the customer and that of society. It ensures that they do not restrict the freedom of choice and free competition in any manner, and mandates to disclose all information truthfully and factually through labeling and other means. It also cautioned to promote and advertise their product in a way that do not mislead, confuse the consumer or violate any of the principles in these guidelines. Provide adequate grievances handling mechanism to address customer concern and feedback. It much emphasized to execute due care and caution while providing goods and services that result in the overexploitation of natural resources or lead to excessive conspicuous consumption. Before I concluding, I encourage viewers to categorize 9 business principles with ESG framework. This understanding will facilitate the next presentation on the environmental component of ESG. Do not forget to subscribe my channel. So stay tuned till the next week. Till then, bye-bye. India's commitment to environmental, social, and governance ESG factors has seen significant growth driven by regulatory changes, rising investor awareness, and corporate responsibility. The Securities and Exchange Board of India, SEBI, introduced the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting (BRSR) framework, making ESG reporting mandatory for the top 1,000 listed companies. This framework is aligned with global standards, emphasizing transparency in environmental and social impacts, corporate governance, and sustainability efforts. India has also set ambitious goals for reducing carbon emissions, including a pledge to reach net zero by 2070 and achieve 500 GW of renewable energy by 2030. These goals have stimulated growth in green finance, with an increase in green bond issuances and supportive policies from the Reserve Bank of India, RBI. While challenges remain, particularly in areas like supply chain transparency and labor rights, India's ESG landscape shows strong potential, especially with ongoing regulatory developments. With sustained efforts, India could further integrate ESG principles across industries, enhancing its global competitiveness in sustainable development. Let us explore the topic in brief. Let us now discuss the origin of ESG in India. The concept of philanthropy in India has deep historical roots in Hindu philosophy, embedded in principles like dan, giving, and seva, service. Ancient texts like the Bhagavad Gita emphasized selfless service and charitable giving as spiritual duties. However, modern corporate philanthropy in India took structured form post-independence, particularly during the 1950s-60s. This period saw industrial families like the Tatas, Birlas, and Godrej establishing charitable trusts and foundations. Initially, these activities were voluntary and often influenced by individual business leaders' personal values rather than structured corporate policies. The informal nature allowed flexibility but lacked standardization and measurable impact assessment, which characterizes modern CSR practices. During the 1970s-80s, there was a surge in environmental awareness globally, driven by concerns about pollution, deforestation, and resource depletion. In India, issues like industrial pollution, soil erosion, and deforestation were becoming evident as industrialization and urbanization expanded. This period saw a growing public understanding of the need to protect natural resources, influenced by worldwide environmental movements such as Earth Day, 1970, and reports like the United Nations Limits to Growth, 1972, which emphasized the finite nature of resources. In response, the Indian government enacted key environmental protection laws to curb pollution and manage resources. The Water, Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974 was among the first, focusing on water pollution control. This was followed by the Air, Prevention and Control of Pollution Act in 1981 and the Comprehensive Environmental Protection Act in 1986, which provided the framework for broader environmental regulation and signified a critical step in institutionalizing environmental protection in India. India's 1991 economic liberalization marked a turning point for businesses as it exposed Indian companies to international markets and global standards, including environmental, social, and governance (ESG) norms. This period of globalization increased competitive pressures and accountability, encouraging companies to align with global sustainability expectations. Indian firms began adopting formal corporate social responsibility (CSR) practices, transitioning from traditional informal philanthropy to structured CSR initiatives aimed at creating social value while ensuring transparency. Over time, this alignment laid the groundwork for India's current ESG framework, driven by regulations like the Companies Act 2013, which mandates CSR activities for certain companies. In the early 2000s, India witnessed a significant shift in its approach to corporate social responsibility (CSR), marked by the formalization of CSR strategies among businesses. This change was accelerated in 2009 when the Ministry of Corporate Affairs issued CSR guidelines, encouraging companies to align their operations with social, environmental, and governance principles. The guidelines urged firms to implement structured CSR programs rather than relying solely on ad hoc charitable activities. This formalization led to an increased focus on building relationships with various stakeholders such as employees, customers, communities, and investors, thereby transforming CSR into a comprehensive, strategic aspect of corporate governance. As companies adopted these practices, they began publishing sustainability reports to transparently showcase their CSR initiatives and achievements. This move not only communicated their commitment to social responsibility, but also allowed them to benchmark their performance against global standards. A key element of this transformation was the alignment with international frameworks like the United Nations Global Compact, UNGC, which laid out universal principles on human rights, labor standards, environmental protection, and anti-corruption. By adopting such global standards, Indian firms not only improved their CSR practices but also enhanced their global competitiveness. This alignment made Indian companies more attractive to international investors and stakeholders who prioritize sustainability and ethical governance in their decision-making. A major milestone in India's corporate social responsibility (CSR) journey came with the enactment of the Companies Act 2013, which mandated that certain companies allocate at least 2% of their net profit to CSR activities. This was a pioneering move, making India the first country to legislate CSR spending at such a scale. The act applied to companies meeting specific criteria such as those with a net worth of Rs 500 crore or more, an annual turnover of Rs 1000 crore, or net profits of Rs 5 crore or more. The Companies Act also introduced a significant governance shift by making CSR committees mandatory at the board level, elevating social responsibility to a strategic business function. These committees are responsible for formulating and overseeing CSR policies and ensuring compliance with the Act. This legislation not only ensured that businesses contribute to societal development, but also heightened their accountability by requiring mandatory disclosure of CSR activities in annual reports. These disclosures promoted transparency, enabling stakeholders, including investors, consumers, and communities, to assess companies' social and environmental impact. The Companies Act of 2013 marked a pivotal shift in how CSR was perceived, moving it from a voluntary or philanthropic activity to a formal and regulated aspect of corporate governance. This increased the credibility of CSR efforts and further encouraged companies to align their practices with global sustainability standards, thereby improving India's corporate sector's transparency and global competitiveness. India has made significant strides in promoting environmental, social, and governance (ESG) practices through a robust regulatory framework, primarily led by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs (MCA) and other key financial institutions like the Securities and Exchange Board of India (SEBI) and the Reserve Bank of India (RBI). In 2019, the MCA introduced the National Guidelines on Responsible Business Conduct (NGRBC), which provides a comprehensive set of principles to guide companies in adopting responsible business practices. These guidelines emphasize ethical business conduct, environmental sustainability, fair treatment of employees, and respect for human rights. They align with India's commitment to sustainable development and are designed to encourage companies to integrate ESG considerations into their core business strategies. In 2021, SEBI introduced the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Reporting (BRSR) framework, which mandates the disclosure of ESG-related data for the top 1,000 listed companies in India. This reporting framework aims to enhance transparency, improve accountability, and enable investors to assess companies' sustainability performance. The BRSR framework is aligned with global reporting standards and focuses on areas such as governance, environmental impact, social responsibility, and business ethics. The adoption of BRSR aims to make ESG reporting more standardized and comparable, thereby